Welcome to Theology of Christian Permaculture. My name is Sean, and today we'll be continuing in the first of our 8 basic ideas on why we need a theology of Christian permaculture, agriculture, ecology, and related practices. Now, today is also a celebratory day because it marks the day after the first video I ever posted online, and that was on Facebook. A minute ago, I said it took me 2.5 months later to post my first video after that on eBay, which I meant YouTube. Must have the task of the day in mind. What you're looking at right now is a flowering quince, but it appears, and I don't know, maybe if we would prune it, get this thing to be a little more unruly. Looks like we had fruit on it last year, so maybe this isn't just a flowering quince, but it is one of my favorite places on our property in early spring with these light coral peach-colored flowers. Seeing as today is a celebratory day celebrating that first video, it's fitting that the scripture that we'll actually be talking about in 1 Chronicles 12:40 also in the end of it has a little bit of a celebratory aspect to it too. Now, in 1 Chronicles 12:40, we see that the people are returning to the land after their captivity. And as they're returning to the land, there's just this basic account of different types of animals. There are donkeys and camels and oxen that are accounted for in this. And, these animals, or what has been traditionally called over the centuries beasts of burden, and still very much in use in much of the developing world still to this day. In the one site that I went on said in poorer countries they still rely heavily on these animals for transportation and for work in the farms and for various tasks of taking things from one place to another. It's interesting that in this list there are more donkeys than anything else, and that probably has a lot to do with, them being more of a personal transport. Maybe more for the women to ride on, as they made this long trek back from the Fertile Crescent back to their homeland. But then it goes on to talk about how there was a feast, and it's just interesting how there's always this aspect of feasting in the scripture, especially later on we'll see where Jesus talks about the marriage supper of the Lamb. And, it's just, there's always this great place given to feasting. But in this case, it talks about feasting with joy. And I think, one of the things that would be good for us, two things here to remember. One is, within the permaculture system, animals do play a huge role in our systems. Now, for us, right now, we do not have any animals. We don't have ducks, chickens, pigs, or any of those type of things. And last year would have been very challenging to have them with the health issues we had. But it's something that I'm constantly considering because, some of the tasks that we struggle with, like weeding, could possibly be eradicated by the use of various types of animals in our system. So in a permaculture system, many times animals find their part in this biodiverse ecosystem that we're creating as pest control and also as weed control. And I think there's probably also an aspect of I don't know that I hear anybody talk about it, but I can imagine, the sense of, there's that sense of responsibility, but also the joy that a lot of animals can bring, when they're doing their silly things that they do. Ever watch videos of goats? I know that people talk about how challenging they can be, and we don't have any, so I don't know how challenging they can be. But I've seen videos of them, and some of the things they do are just help to lighten your heart and to make it more joyful in the farming aspect. A lot of this goes with all kinds of animals. Right now, we just have a a couple of stray cats that we brought into the house, like one of them 2 years ago and the other one like 5 years ago. Well, actually, no, like 10 years ago after the tornado came through here. And, some of the things they do, sometimes the meowing at all hours of the night can be a little annoying, but, there are other things they do, like the way they play, the way they just, if there's an empty box, they find their way into it. They're so curious, and they just bring so much added joy, into our house, and many times lighten the mood, especially, when we're doing various tasks that, are kind of rote when it comes to our online book business. In many ways, animals are a necessary part of the permaculture system. And technically I say that we don't have animals in our permaculture system, but we do have wild animals. And, well, and I don't know if I talked about it in a video or an update video, or one that I haven't posted yet, but we have rabbits and deer that just I'm constantly finding in the garden. I've got to repair a couple places in our deer fence, and well, and for the rabbits, they're good at weed control, but they're also good at eating the cultivated vegetables that we wanted to keep. So I planted 12, 6, one was already, I broke, and then one was already dead. So I planted 10 cauliflower and broccoli plants, and here over the last week, they're all been mowed down. It could possibly be the deer, but I think they would have left holes in this cheap landscape fabric that I bought a long time ago that I was just trying to make use of. So, we have animals in our system, and we've seen, over the years that when pressure comes from one type of bug or whatever, another one shows up to ease that pressure, or an animal, a certain type of bird will show up. So, essentially, regardless, animals are always an essential part of a permaculture. We could still use animals to transport various things from one location to another and save petrol or gas, but also there is the feed. But like here, we have so many weeds that just grow up. We could save money on, petrol, gas in our lawnmowers just by having animals to control most of the weeds or the grasses that grow up, especially in the orchards. So, there's that aspect. But then the other aspect is, this idea of joy in feasting. And as we work towards, getting to the place where we have this abundance that the permaculture, that the permaculturist strives for, the agriculturist strives for. I mean, even essentially, whichever one of these ecological agricultural fields we work in, we want to see the earth in abundance, providing for people, providing for ourselves, and just remembering as we partake in this harvest that, though there is labor, there is the joy of being able to feast upon what has been grown with our own hands and our own work and the sweat off of our brow. And many of these things, are kind of easier in a permaculture system as it gets set up more and more, because there's less and less of these things that you less and less aspects that you worry about. So, like adding inputs constantly, is something that you don't really worry about as much. Or if you do add inputs, you're doing inputs that are actually more beneficial to the overall system. Whereas, in a standard or, a commercial system in big agriculture, there's a lot heavy use of pesticides and herbicides in order to control things. Well, there's less of that input, but then there's also the adding of, other fertilizers and things like that in order to, cause the plants to grow, because all the soil life is depleted by the use of all the chemicals. And so in the permaculture system, we're kind of trying to we are seeking to eradicate all those extra inputs, And so as we do that, in the end, the goal is that we would have this abundance of a harvest. And it's not just so that we hog it to ourselves, which, a couple of videos later, maybe, I don't know, at this point, I guess 10 videos later, we will run into a passage in Amos which talks about, just really, talks about, how our hearts should be towards, what we do with that abundance that we've been given. And, and we have to see it as Christians, that it's all given to us, though we put in, some work and, all that. God gives us that ability, and it is God and God alone who gives the increase. And so, when we go into it, it would be well for us to remind ourselves, or to be reminded, that there should be a great sense of joy in the harvest, especially when we are partaking in the meal, and with that, a great sense of thankfulness. So, from First Chronicles 12:40, we just get this list of animals, and we get this little passage that talks about how they feasted with joy. And here we go. We have a couple lessons that we could easily apply to our lives. And may God bless you, beloved of the Lord. May He bless you. May He keep you. May He cause His face to shine upon you. May He give you peace. May He ever be radiant towards you. God bless you, beloved of the Lord.